You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
As world attention remains focused on the uprising in Egypt, many questions remain unanswered. And so we'd like to turn now to an Israeli who's recognized as one of the world's leading experts on Middle East affairs and the Arab-Israeli conflict, Professor Barry Rubin, director of the Global Research and International Affairs Center in Tel Aviv. Barry is also the editor of the Middle East Review of International Affairs, and he is the author of many books on aspects of contemporary Middle East turmoil, including The Long War for Freedom, the Arab Struggle for Democracy in the Middle East. And Barry Rubin, thank you so much for giving us some time again.
Thank you.
Barry, I want to begin with the most important question that is on the minds of most American Jews. In your opinion, Barry, is the current upheaval in Egypt a serious danger to the state of Israel?
Well, first of all, just let me say my last book is entitled Muslim Brotherhood. But at any rate, yes, it's an understatement, and it's overwhelmingly understood in Israel to this effect. I've been trying to, since the thing began, I've been trying to get people to understand this, and against incredible, overwhelming odds. I've never seen a story more poorly covered, more inaccurately covered in all of my career, which I think goes back about 40 years. I mean, look, I could give a list of about 10 or 12 different points that have been ignored. I mean, big points, such as, well, let me start at the beginning. Last October 7th, I wrote an article called "The Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood Declares War on America. Will America Notice?" No mass media outlet has mentioned this article at all. And I don't say that at a personal pique, but when I explain what the article said, I think it's valid. The article pointed out that the leader of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood made an extremely important speech in which, in my opinion, he changed Brotherhood policy. In the speech, he sounded like Osama bin Laden, and he called for jihad against America, and he called for revolution. And, of course, there's the usual anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism. And the basic concept of his view is that America's falling apart, they're losing, the Islamists are winning, so now is the time to really step on the accelerator. Now, I think that this speech, in hindsight, represented the move which, at least to a considerable extent, has led to these events in Egypt in the last couple of weeks. That it was not only a change in Muslim Brotherhood policy, but I think that was at least as significant as people being good on Facebook. A second factor that hasn't been covered properly is the fact that Mohammed al-Baradei is a front for the Brotherhood. This is no secret. I mean, it's well known in Egypt. It's well known by any expert who has real knowledge of Egypt. And therefore, to push him toward the presidency is basically to let the Muslim Brotherhood become power behind the throne. The third point is that it was totally ignored that the Brotherhood and al-Baradei is on record favoring the tearing up of the Egypt-Israel peace treaty. It is not reported that it is well known and on record that El Baradei and the Brotherhood favor ending sanctions on the Gaza Strip, which means that weapons can pour into the Gaza Strip to be used to attack Israel. I have literally not seen any of the points I've made so far reported in a single Western newspaper.
I agree 100% with you, Barry. You know, Barry, in the Western media, in American television, the suggestion is that the Muslim Brotherhood has evolved over time.
One thing you can notice in all of these articles and all of these points is that they give no evidence.
Yes.
And in fact, it's amusing when articles give a claim and then contradict it. So I was just a few minutes ago reading an article which said that the Muslim Brotherhood isn't really important in demonstrations, and then revealed the fact from interviewing people there that the Muslim Brotherhood's youth group was in the demonstrations 3 days before the Muslim Brotherhood told its senior adult members to join. So, in fact, they were there from the very beginning, not as reported, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's totally ridiculously absurd and has left out all the key elements here. Now, that doesn't mean that a lot of Egyptians don't want democracy and should have sympathy, but one also has to understand the history of the regime, the nature of the regime, the history of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the implications of this event, so that only today in the Washington Post was it finally reported what, again, everyone in the region knows, which is that because of the policy of the Obama administration toward Egypt, every country in the Middle East that is an American ally, and it applies to Saudi Arabia and Jordan, as well as Israel, believes that the U.S. government cannot be trusted to keep its commitments. It is not a reliable ally. And this is no mystery. This is something I've been writing about now for 2 years, over and over again. And now it's starting to become clear when the governments of Jordan and Saudi Arabia, Morocco, look at what happened in Egypt, they wonder, when will the day come when in a 24-hour period the United States government throws us under the bus? Mm-hmm. So how is the U.S. going to have allies in future? How is the U.S. going to expect Middle Eastern governments to listen to what it wants, to take risks on its behalf if it has no credibility? So there's point after point that this is a disaster. It's a disaster both because of the objective facts, but it's also a disaster because of the ignorance of these facts among Western elites, media, and policymakers. In my opinion, then, is not an Islamist Egypt, certainly not in the next few years, but a radical Egyptian state which mixes Islamism with also elements of radical nationalism and would be a total disaster for regional stability.
When President Obama said to Mubarak, "It's time for you to leave now," was he making a mistake?
Yeah, of course. First of all, he was making a mistake in that he spoke too soon before we saw the direction of events and understood enough about them. Secondly of all, he acted too publicly. This is not how these things are done. And when you do these things publicly, it has an effect,
yes,
which is explained by my third point, which is they did not make a distinction between Mubarak and the regime. He didn't, although it's true he said Mubarak should go now, but really the policy was the whole regime should go. Now, when you say the whole regime should go, that's not just Mubarak, that's thousands of people. It's everybody in the army with the rank of general. It's the entire upper leadership. It's the management of state enterprises. In other words, when he said that, he doesn't understand what he's doing, which is not, I mean, look, I don't want to be partisan. I want to get involved in American politics. But, I mean, what can you say when people don't have any experience in international affairs? Mm-hmm. So he was threatening the entire Egyptian elite. And how do you think they're going to react? Mm-hmm. Give up and run away? Give up power? I mean, obviously they want power to people with power, greed, and selfishness, but also because they fear for their lives. So the way to handle it is you find out what's going on. You go to them quietly and privately and say, look, you have to, this is what diplomacy is all about. You have to agree with us. President Mubarak's 82 years old. It's really time he leaves office. And, you know, and then you have to make some reforms. You have to be more flexible. And let's talk about this privately, and you see the logic of what we're saying. But by making the retirement of Mubarak into the fall of the entire regime, President Obama absolutely guaranteed that his policy would fail miserably. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the other side of the coin is, what if his policy had succeeded? Then this would have been extraordinarily dangerous. You don't go into the largest country in the Arab world and say, okay, yeah, we're going to have a transition, we're going to have a totally new system. Well, new what? What system? You know, who's going to take over? This is playing with the fate of tens of millions of people. And finally, how can an administration that talked on and on about America is not going to be a bully, we're not going to go around telling other people what to do, we're going to listen to others and learn from them, and then you get one of the most bullying acts in the modern history of American foreign policy. You know, you go, I want a government change, go away. As if, you know, he's the emperor and the Egyptians are serfs. I mean, you want to talk about Western imperialistic arrogance. Nothing could more demonstrate that kind of behavior than this. Mm-hmm. It was total amateurism. It was total incompetence. And fortunately, the Egyptian leadership may save us all from disaster brought about by this kind of behavior. And by the way, I want to tell you something, and I'll keep it in general terms. Don't think that a very large number of Americans who have a lot of experience and professionalism in dealing with international affairs don't agree with even though they would never say a word publicly, they agree with every word that I just said, and they know it's true, and they were horrified.
It's interesting that when we saw this portrayed on American television, no one could tell us, Barry, how it really started or who, the who
no,
behind it.
No, actually they could, but you're still right, and let me explain. Credit for beginning this movement, credit for beginning these events is given to the April 6th movement. There has been a specific individual who's been identified as setting it off.
Who's that?
I'll think of her name in a moment. But a regular person. I'm sorry, I'm just blanking out on the name.
You know, Barry, this is the first time I've ever heard this reference, and I'm a news junkie here.
She's been interviewed.
Okay, but in America, Barry, no one has heard of this April reference you just made. It's never been reported.
No reporter of all of these highly paid reporters on the scene has, as far as I can see, made a serious effort to identify what the April 6th movement is and who is behind it. Now, it's quite possible that it's a bunch of democratic-minded people. However, the woman in question is wearing a chador, which is pretty extreme, even by Egyptian standards. In other words, she's clearly a very pious Muslim, and I mean, I would think, given the way she's dressed, I mean, it's not like she's wearing a short or long skirt. She's not wearing a headscarf and a conservative coat. She is like enveloped, and it is conceivable to me that she is an Islamist. It's conceivable to me that this is a result of the decision by the Brotherhood last October to move to a revolutionary position. Now, I do not want to promote a conspiracy theory. I do not know this, but at least this is a question that people should be asking. Mm-hmm. But here's what's really important, and I'm speaking here as a political analyst. Again, I would be very happy if Egyptians lived in a stable, democratic country. Have no doubt, nothing would make Israelis happier than if Egypt was a stable, moderate, democratic country at peace with its neighbors.
Of course.
Now, literally, I don't want to exaggerate, literally not a single point that I have made in this entire interview has been made on any, I don't want to say any, on virtually no American television or radio.
You're absolutely right.
Or mass media.
You're absolutely right.
It's not that there aren't people who are suspicious. It's that they don't have the knowledge and have not done the research. I just one simple fact that amazes me. In the hundreds and thousands of articles written to say the Muslim Brotherhood is moderate, nobody has ever cited a single statement made in Arabic by Muslim Brotherhood leaders or journals. It's all what the guy told me, how lovable they are. Mm-hmm. And I've had sophisticated friends say to me, oh, I talked to someone in Egypt, and they said, oh, the Brotherhood doesn't even want Islamism, and it's really moderate. Why doesn't anybody look at their newspapers and their speeches? This is not how you inform the American people. This is a farce. Mm-hmm. Then people say the U.S. put Mubarak in power. That's such nonsense. It has no connection to the historic record. And what this crisis reveals about the inability to have an accurate description and discussion of crises and events in the Middle East is as dangerous as the events in Egypt themselves.
Tell me again, why is it so bad that we in the West, we watch American television and there is no subtlety or sophistication? What's the real danger in terms of our own foreign policy?
Make the wrong decisions and have the wrong concepts. Look, from the Israel point of view, it's no mystery that Israel has been the subject of Western media bias and false accusations and so on for many years. Now, and actually, it has really gotten better to a large extent, say, since about 2005. But now we're faced with something beyond bizarre, far more extreme than that, which is the romanticization of radical Islamists. Mm-hmm. That suddenly there are these big efforts, and if we had more time, I could tell you in great detail about the lobbies and how they're organized. Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Muslim Brotherhood. These are really moderate groups. How many articles? There's nothing to be afraid of. You know, they're really sweet and cuddly. And these are groups which use an anti-Semitism more extreme than anything heard in the world since the fall of the Berlin bunker in 1945. An organization like Hamas, which in its charter says that Jews are responsible for all the world's wars and are conspiring to take over the world, that it's widely described as moderate in so many circles and so on. I mean, this is far more bizarre and extreme than anything that ever happened with Yasser Arafat and the PLO. Mm-hmm. And how can this be happening and how can it be combated is a very key task of the present. I mean, the symbol of this for me is in the New York Times op-ed by Tariq Ramadan. Tariq Ramadan is considered like the most sophisticated Islamist intellectual in the world. He taught at Oxford. They want him to teach at Notre Dame. You know, he's a hero. He speaks before a no doubt largely Jewish audience in Manhattan and is greeted with wild applause. This guy just wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times that is not just full of lies, but it's full of the most crude lies, the most ridiculous lies. He's not even trying hard to cover things up because he's come to the conclusion, in my opinion, that the New York Times and the Western media and the audience is so stupid that he doesn't have to even break into a sweat to fool them. So he does, for example, he doesn't say, which is a traditional line, of course we're against Zionism because all of Palestine is Muslim territory. I mean, this is like the kind of thing they would say himself. He said, oh, yeah, the only reason we were against Zionism is because of what the Irgun and the Stern gang did in the late 1940s. That was like our only problem with it. And to publish that in the New York, and believe me, there are 10 other things. To publish that in the New York Times is and get away with it is totally shocking. I'm waiting to see if anybody else writes a critique of this article other than myself. Mm-hmm. So we've gotten to a point of craziness that 3, 5, 8, 10 years ago would have been unimaginable. That we know that anti-Israel stuff is taught in classrooms, but it's gone so far beyond that to literally the realm of what I would call insanity. Mm-hmm. One can only hope that the very extremism and nuttiness of what at some points is becoming mainstream is precisely the fact that will make people understand that these are lies.
You know, Barry, in America there is this longing, this idealistic longing to find in everyone the nicer side, always to be for the underdog, and that the Obama administration itself is very reluctant to say anything that would position it against even Islamic fundamentalism. Is
Sure.
there anything if you had the ear of the President of the United States, what's the one message you'd like to give him?
I don't, and I won't, and he won't listen. However, there are others who will. So to give an example, Senator Dianne Feinstein made a statement today in which she said, we have to be very careful because the Muslim Brotherhood is a radical group and might take over. I'm a great believer that reality forces people to face the facts and to adjust to them. Of course, the problem is sometimes it takes too long, and people suffer and die unnecessarily because it's taken too long. And by the way, that's a real pattern in American history. We saw it in dealing with fascism in the 30s. We saw it dealing with communism after World War II. And what we're seeing now follows that traditional pattern. But in the traditional pattern, people eventually do wake up and deal with those issues and in the end win.
Yes, but I'm asking you, I guess, Barry, is this a function of American naivete, or is something else, do you believe, going on here?
I think there are lots of things, but naivete, ignorance, thinking that everybody in the world is the same, refusing to understand that different societies, as Mubarak said, President Obama, you don't understand Egyptian culture. And these factors are critical. There are definitely people who have no love for American interests, who are trying to foment this, and who are deliberately trying to lead people in a bad direction. And if we had time, we could discuss that in more detail. But I and other people who work on this watch this every day. So there's an ideological aspect. There's a people who are deliberately trying to damage America aspect. There's a naivete aspect, and there's an ignorant aspect. Compromises, concessions, and a new leadership in Egypt without having an entirely new regime in Egypt.
I understand. I love talking to you, Barry. There are few people in the world who are able to be as articulate about an issue as you are, and when it comes to the Middle East, no one knows better or more than you do. I thank you so much. I will continue to turn to you. I can't thank you enough.
Sure. Would you like me to give you a one-sentence teaser?
Yes.
At this moment, I'm working on a book called Germany, the Nazis, and the Making of the Modern Middle East. We have hundreds of pages of documents from the CIA about what happened before, during, and after World War II that has a lot of revelations in it. It's amazing. I've learned a huge amount, and there's some specific points that have never been made public before that when I tell people, they just gape in amazement. So, but that's for next year.
Okay.
Take care.
We'll talk again soon. Thank you, Barry.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And those were the thoughts of Professor Barry Rubin, Director of the Global Research in International Affairs Center in Tel Aviv, and the editor of the Middle East Review of International Affairs. We hope you enjoyed hearing his amazing analysis of the entire uprising in Egypt. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have through the ideas expressed by Barry Rubin. Please email me or write me, post on our Facebook page, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you this week. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.